Hey, welcome everybody to this Edge of Mind podcast, where my guest today is someone I've been wanting to talk to for quite a long time, Federico Faggin. Amazing, remarkable individual, as you will see. And as usual, I will read a slightly abbreviated version of his rich life. And then we're just going to jump right in, I think, into the most rich material possible. So Federico Faggin was born in Vicenza, Italy, and graduated in physics, summa cum laude, from the University of Padua in 1965. Faggin came to the US in 1968, working for Fairchild Semiconductor, where he led the development of the MOS silicon gate technology, a key process technology that was adopted worldwide to manufacture most contemporary integrated circuits. Working for Intel Corporation from 1970 to 1974, Faggin designed many products, including the world's first microprocessor. In 1974, he began an entrepreneurial career and co-founded several startup companies, notably Zylog, where he developed the Z80 microprocessor, and then Synaptics, the developer of the early touchpads and touch screens now used nearly universally in all mobile devices. Faggin is now president of the Federico and Elvia Faggin Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the scientific study of consciousness. He's won numerous awards. I think one of the most compelling ones is the National Medal of Technology and Innovation given by President Barack Obama. So Federico, I know how busy you are. Thank you so much for taking time and chatting with us about your truly remarkable life, that there's no overestimation when we make these proclamations.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you for all of you present. As Andrew said, I was born in 1941 in Vicenza, which is a small town near Venice. And I spent my early years in a small town, actually a village, a little more than a village, on the outskirts of Vicenza because of the war. In 1943, the Allied forces were from Sicily were moving up north, and my parents, rightly so, decided to move in the countryside where they came from. That was safer. In fact, our apartment in Vicenza was destroyed by the bombs, and I basically lived there like people used to live, in the agricultural era, in the country, in the countries, in the farms. Many farms didn't have electricity. They were still plowing the fields with oxen-driven plows, and there was no running water or no bathroom in the house, and basically just like 200-300 years ago, people lived. And so I had an incredible experience there, though we had electricity in our home because we were in the actual small town. But my uncle, for example, had a farm, and and I used to go there often, and seeing how life was completely different than what it was even in Vicenza, where I was born. But I was too small to know that. So when I was about 8, I went back to Italy, to Vicenza. I found the Industrial Revolution there in full swing, and I went to a technical high school because I was interested in machines. I didn't think I could understand machine. People were much harder, and so my desire to comprehend and understand was already quite operational, even when I was 4 or 5 years old. And my father was actually a scholar. He translated the Enneads of Plotinus, for example, wrote a history of philosophy in 3 volumes for various schools, especially for the classical lycée where he was teaching, and also for the early courses at university. And so, but I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in model planes. And so by the time I was 11, I actually designed and built my own model plane, which flew, not the first, the third. And because of that, I wanted to study. I wanted to become a aeronautical engineer, and I went to a technical high school that would prepare for that. But I had to, but they stopped teaching that, and so I studied radio technology. And then when I was 18, I graduated and went to work for Olivetti. Olivetti in those days was quite advanced. They had just introduced, I'm talking about 1960. So in 59, they just introduced their first electronic computer, all using transistors, which was one of the early, in fact, some claim it was the first electronic computer to use transistors in the world, commercial. And so I joined Olivetti, and I was lucky enough that at one point, after a few months of training and so on, I was assigned a project, and I ended up leading that project, where I designed for about 60% and built for 90% a small experimental computer using transistors that worked at the end of a year, end of 1961. I joined in the fall of 1960 Olivetti. And that experience really was shaped me, because being able to do that, and I must say that was because, since I was 16, I was reading anything I could about computers, and I became intrigued by computers, and I read about transistors, and I was intrigued by transistors. Even if at school I was taught vacuum tubes, because those were the way to do electronics in those days, in the late 50s. So that experience was foundational. I would not have been able to develop the first microprocessor, design the first microprocessor, if I had not had that experience. Because in that experience, I had to design the logic, actually the architecture, the logic, the circuit design, and build it using single transistors, resistors, capacitors, the usual components of electronics in those days. So toward the end of 61, I decided that I wanted to study more. I wanted to understand quantum physics, because transistors worked because they use a new physics that I never studied at school, quantum physics. And so I went to University of Padua, and I graduated in physics there. And then I worked on a semiconductor company in Italy called SGS Fairchild, that was partly owned, 30% owned by Fairchild Semiconductor. And that's the reason why I found myself in 68. I found myself in California, in Silicon Valley, working for Fairchild. Because of my experience at SGS Fairchild, and I must say also my creativity, I figured out a way to do a completely different process to make integrated circuits called silicon technology, which made possible all the missing ingredients to make a computer on a chip. Those ingredients were microprocessors, the dynamic random memories, random access memories, the non-volatile memories, and also the CCD, which were in those days had just been invented. And required a double gate structure. And so my technology called silicon gate technology allowed me also to design the first commercial circuit using the technology, the Fairchild 3708. And later, when I joined Intel was formed to actually take advantage of that technology. Said bluntly, they copied the technology that I developed at Fairchild. In those days, that was common. And so later on, I joined Fairchild. 2 years later, I joined Fairchild. Intel, where there was a project that no one could, was able to design. It was a project. It was an architecture of a of a computer that according to them should be able to fit on a chip, but nobody could do it. And in fact, without a couple of inventions that I had made a virtual, which they did not know, it would not have been possible. And that was ended up being the Intel 4004, the world's first microprocessor. That chip actually show how to do random logic to the industry, which at that time had a technology which there was much poorer. For example, 5 times slower. It could only fit the same area of silicon, half the number of transistors. So it was, that was such a major step that allowed to really create all the pieces missing so that you could put an entire computer on a chip, which happened about 7 years later. Those are the chips that you now call microcontrollers, which are a small computer in a single chip, which now you can buy for for less than $1. and they have the power which in those days require a computer the size of a very large room. So that technology was fueled the information revolution that has swept our society since the late 50s, but really accelerated the process to an extent that today in our pocket we have as much computing power as all the computers built by 1960. So it's amazing. Intel was a company that started with the idea of developing memories, semiconductor memories, because the technology of memories at that time, I'm talking about 1968, was used magnetic, tiny magnetic toroids with wires going through those magnetic toroids. So it was a very bulky, very expensive, use a lot of power, and semiconductor and the first memories were use silicon gate technology was the right solution, but they did not recognize the power of microprocessor early on. And so I decided that I wanted to start my own company to really accelerate the process of adoption of microprocessor in the industry. I started a company called Zylog with one of my managers. At that time, I was department manager of Intel, in doing pretty much all of the chips except for dynamic memories. So that company, in that company, I was CEO of that company, clearly, and I developed the first product was the Z80 microprocessor, a third generation 8-bit microprocessor that became a bestseller. It's still in volume production today. What is it? Almost 50 years later, and that product ended up having tens of thousands of different applications, but the important thing for me at Zylog was not so much what I did in terms of products and technologies, but it was the growth that I had by being, pushed from being an engineer that, yes, was leading a number of different projects or a number of other engineers and scientists, but essentially doing a technical type of work, to having to worry about marketing and sales and finance and all that is required, production and all that is required to start a company and to lead it. So I grew up. That's where my hair started becoming gray, even if I started the company when I was 32, because I grew up immensely. Just think that when the team was put together, we had 11 people to start the development of the microprocessor and the support development system for the software. And so by, when the Z80 was announced, we had 11 people. And 3 years later, we have 1,100 people. So you can imagine, the rate of growth that I had to go through personally in order to handle all of that. Anyway, I became a serial entrepreneur. And my third company was called Synaptics. Started in '86. That company, where Zylog started at the end of '74. Synaptics, the idea was to develop computers that learn, and so that you don't have to program them, using neural networks, an idea which had been around since the late '50s, but the cognizant, the experts in artificial intelligence thought that it was a bad idea. They thought that you couldn't do much with it. But I recognize that being being something similar to what we have in our head was the correct methodology and the correct structure in order to learn. And the idea, though, was that using analog technology, I could have a much faster processing speed and with much less electronics, because to do the simulation of neural networks, we needed computers much faster and with much more memory than what we had available. So enough of that technology to know that that would be the future. But it took another 20 years before neural networks ended up showing their power. And that's the heart of the AI and robotics progress that you see today is due to the fact that now we have computers so much more powerful than we had in the mid-'80s, that we can do those things quite effectively. So I had to, after 5 years of work in this direction, I had to decide, hey, it would take much more time to really develop this technology, to make it commercially available and so on. So I decided, well, we had to figure out something, otherwise we have to close the door. And I came up with the idea of replacing the trackball that was used in those days to move the cursor on a laptop computer with a solid state structure that could do a much better job. And so I put together 4 or 5 of our best engineers, the more creative engineers. I launched the idea and got in the process. And in a couple of months, we invented the touchpads and the touch screen that ended up changing the way that we interface with our devices. And so that was the beginning of the success of Synaptics. But I must take a step back of a few years, because while I was doing neural networks, I was studying neuroscience, I was studying biology, because I wanted to understand more deeply how neural networks actually work, how living systems work. And it was at that time that reading these books of neuroscience, I was, they were telling me that, the signals that there are in the electrical, biochemical signals that we have in the brain, and they were explaining, for example, how we can, recognize, an object by describing signals that would course through these neural networks. But I asked myself, but wait a second, I don't see signals. If I taste a piece of chocolate, I have a taste of chocolate in my mouth. That's how I know that, that what I have in my mouth is chocolate. So, how can electrical signals produce the taste of chocolate in my mouth? And that was, I discovered what later the philosophers in '95, Chalmers, called the hard problem of consciousness, which is, how can we have actually an experience? How can we feel? So that, that revelation to me was very important, because at that time I was also not very happy about my life, even though I had accomplished everything that one accomplishing it should feel, should feel happy. I had a wonderful family. Everybody was happy, was healthy. I had more money than I could spend in my life because Zylog was, sufficiently successful that I didn't have to work anymore. I was famous, sufficiently famous that I didn't need any more fame. But I was unhappy, and I didn't know why. And it was through this recognition and having the courage to face that recognition, because for a while I was just pretending not to be unhappy and pretending to be happy. So it was in that milieu that I had an extraordinary experience of consciousness, because I wanted to understand how computers can, how computers could be possibly conscious, given that at that time I was a materialist. I studying physics. I thought that everything was physical, and so anything that exists has to be physical. I never had, thought that there could be something either extra physical or some deeper reality out of which the physical reality would emerge, and that was not in my purview. I can say that now, but not then. And so I thought that if, like scientists were saying at that time and now, the consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the functioning of the brain. In other words, it emerges from the functioning of the brain, but it has no causal power. Then I should be able to make a conscious computer, because a computer is also a information processing system like the brain is, and then I should be able to have a conscious computer. And so I was in my spare time thinking about how could I do that, and the more I thought about it, the more impossible that appeared. How can I transform electrical signal in sensations? And sensations are a different quality, something that is impossible to connect with the rest of what we know, with the physics. And so that was the milieu that allowed me to have this extraordinary experience of consciousness when I was just in a very relaxed place. It was Christmas holidays, and we had a home in Lake Tahoe, and we were up skiing I was up there skiing with the family. And one night I woke up at the middle of the night, and it was midnight, and I was thirsty. I went to get a glass of water, went back to bed. And as I was there, just quietly trying to go back to sleep, a beam of energy came out of my chest. It was like a rush, with unbelievable strength. It was white, scintillating light, and it felt like love. And it was actually love so powerful that I never had experienced anything like that before. And then it exploded. And now everything is full of this white, scintillating light that feels like love. And then as I was looking at it, all of a sudden, I realized that I was looking at myself. This white, scintillating light is me. My God. So I am that light, and I see that light with my point of view, because my point of view was the same point of view that I always had. And as I was looking at myself, I also recognized that this is that stuff that feels like love, that also feels joy, that feels like joy, feels like peace. I was at peace, and I never had that peace. remember that I was very unhappy with myself. I felt at home. This is me. That was what gave me the idea. So the thought also followed this whole thing, followed this whole experience. By the way, my body was vibrating as this experience was going on. So now I could say that probably a big number of my cells were in resonance with what was going on. I thought, wow, this is what everything is made of. This stuff has what everything is made of. And that was the end of the experience. And that transformed me completely, to the point that, because that experience had a power of feeling true, feeling that I actually knew. Before I thought that the best way that you can do when you know is to prove a theorem. But no, this was immensely more, it was a direct type of knowing. I can use those words now after 30 years of work, but in those days I could not use those words. But it was a form of direct knowing where I was the experience. And so this type of experience changed my perspective completely. And I began a journey of trying to understand myself while I was still running Synaptics in those days. But I put 30–40% of my time from that point on to understand this animal called consciousness. The first time that now I got what consciousness is. It was much, much more than what I thought before when I was trying to make a conscious computer. This is light years beyond what I thought consciousness was before. And I stop here, otherwise I keep on talking.
Oh, Federico, I could listen to you forever. It just remarkable. First of all, thank you so much for your generosity and your candor in sharing this type of experience, because it's so heretical, it's so antithetical to even oppositional to the materialistic view, that this kind of transformation flip is monumental from a hardcore materialist, admittedly hardcore materialist, into what we'll venture in shortly, into an idealist. But gosh, there's so much to say here. So when you had this experience, Federico, you write in your beautiful book, Silicon, how you then explored some traditions that seemingly helped you understand, stabilize to a certain extent what actually happened. Because what I wanted to journey with you here in the next few minutes is you are uniquely situated to dance between two usually completely disparate worlds, the world of science, and there we use the catch-all term, the world of spirit. And there aren't too many people that have the capacities in both these domains to really speak with tremendous authority, cross-pollinate, and therefore be transformational in them. So before we transition into the more technical, deeper, really elegant theories that you have around quantum information-based panpsychism, before we go there, can you say a little bit more, because this particular audience, yes, there's some scientists that listen to this and academics, but mostly, as you might suspect, the humanities. And so this very human, wonderful experience that you share, you also share a couple things in your book that maybe, if I might invite you to share here, further experiences, like the experience of the woman. You're sitting in the car, you have the experience of the woman next to you, and it's almost as if your consciousness jumped into her. I mean, these sort of things that, of course, would just be like, this person must be insane. Well, I mean, insanity is a matter of contrast and degree. And so if you feel comfortable, share a little bit more about what happened when your heart mind blew open to this extent. And the other thing I want to say that I find remarkably compelling here is that you share in your book that this tectonic shift took place within a time frame of like 1 minute. And to me, this is amazing. I mean, here you are, a lifelong materialist, and you have an experience that's so true, so foundational. I mean, I would argue perhaps somewhat akin to a near-death experience. You don't have to have an NDE over and over to change you. You just need one, because it's so true. It's so foundational. So in a real, this is like a near-death experience, authentic contact with reality that within the course of 1 minute shape-shifted your entire life. So a couple of things, just to paraphrase, maybe with your generosity, share a little bit more about some of these really mind-opening experiences that you did have. And then the role of some of the traditions that you explored that helped you perhaps understand what happens, perhaps even help you to stabilize the experience? Or are we okay going there before we jump into the deep end of the pool?
All right. Oh, that's with pleasure. Let me. So the first thing that I did was to find a transpersonal psychologist that could help me, because I realized that this was not a pathology, but it was something that that went beyond, and I certainly didn't want to consult anybody that would, they would not understand, and they would consider my experience a pathology, which would be the normal way that psychiatrists for sure would interpret what I had. So that was the beginning. She introduced me to a number of authors, a number of books and ideas and so on. And so that was the beginning of this journey that little by little reveal through all kinds of extraordinary experiences, because much of my theory was dictated by having had many different experiences of consciousness, because at that time I wanted to explore this animal called consciousness. What is it? I mean, what are the boundaries? Are there boundaries? What is going on here? And so I was open to finding out, but the only way to know is not to read books, but to experience. I mean, that's how we know. Consciousness is the fact that we can know by experiencing. So I always realized that experience was foundational, and because repeating what I read in a book is not good enough. Sorry about it, but it's not good enough. Or pretending that I'm also having something that somebody is writing about is not the same thing as having it. So for me, that the rooting my learning and understanding on experiences was, from the very beginning, since it was exactly an experience that changed me, was really what I wanted. And so I had hundreds of different experiences. For example, you mentioned one that I wrote in the book Silicon, and which happened reasonably early. Probably happened a couple of years after I had this awakening, what I call awakening experience. I hate to use the word mystical because it's considered a bad word, especially among scientists. And so in this case, I had just taken my son to school, and I was going back to the office. And at one point, I was stopped at a traffic light, and I just naturally turned to my left, where there was a car stop, and inside this car there was a woman driving, and in a split second I felt my consciousness there where the woman was in the other car, and I was stunned. But it was that was few seconds. And so as I was driving back to the office, then after the light turned green, I was thinking, my God, I mean, how is that possible? I mean, I had not read at that point about out-of-body experience, or I was still exploring. And so I was there, only for an instant. So I didn't know. I mean, I knew that I was there. and so in those days I was already journaling. So when I went to the office, I started writing a journal that would help me catch a little bit of the nuances of what I felt, even if it was a very short experience. And as I was writing, at one point I lifted my eyes and I look outside in in those days, we were in a sort of a campus kind of area with with different office buildings around a sort of a manicure grass and trees and so on. So I look up, and all of a sudden I am out there. My consciousness was in the trees, in the grass, in the building in front of me. It was everywhere. Wow. And then I look inside the office, and now I see in front of me, I see a person. And this person is looking at me. And as I look at this person, I see that it's me looking at myself. So that person is me, myself. I mean, what's going on here? And then it was the end of the experience. So, this is just to give you an idea of the stuff that now that I had to contend with, in the sense of explaining, because I am a physicist. I want to explain. I was to explain things. But, then later on, for example, I had experiences where my consciousness was a point of light at the base of my sternum. Just one point of light. Everything that I am was that point of light. Then I had an experience where I was only the experience. There was nobody watching. I was the experience, period. So that was a non-dual experience. There was no watcher. There was only experience. Then I have an experience where it was the remembrance of what it must have been like when I was probably a few weeks old. And so there was a field where everything that exists, there were sounds, lights, and feelings all in this field, and no one was watching. And this actually was foundational later on for me to understand the different way in which consciousness experiences versus the body, and all those things. Those are the crucial things, which then, of course, reading what other people are saying, are correlated, and then little by little I create a picture where things have to be have to be coherent. They have to be coherent with my experience, most of all, but also with something that sounds true, logical, rational, that other people are saying. So it took 20 years of different experiences, different school of thoughts, different type of meditation. It would take days to report many of those things that they were important. But after 20 years of this, I realized that consciousness must be fundamental, must be the source of everything. So no longer it can be explained as a phenomenon, but it is what creates all phenomena. So all of a sudden, it's a completely turn where instead of matter, consciousness deriving from matter or some more sophisticated matter, or no, matter and everything else that exists comes from it. So, wow. At that point, I decided, well, now it's time for me to stop what I'm doing. At that time, I was still working. At that time, I already, stepped up. I was chairman. This time, 20 years later, we're talking about, 2008, 2000, something like that. I was chairman of Synaptics in 2007, chairman of Synaptics, so I had more time. So I was already dedicating probably 60% of my time to study of consciousness. But I decided that's it. Now I get out of everything that I'm doing, all my commitments. I was running running another company at that time, sell the company, and get out of this, and concentrate 100% studying what does it mean if consciousness is fundamental. What does it mean? I realized that everything changes. If you start that way, the narrative of physics changes from this to that completely, 180 degrees. What is cause is effect, or vice versa. So, so then again, that was what I had. I had read that many people thought that consciousness, had to be fundamental and so on, but until I was convinced myself that it had to be that way, I wasn't ready to jump to the next phase of my life. I call it my fourth life. I was living my third life as a life of an entrepreneur, together with my, simultaneously, I had a double life with the life of a person that explores the spiritual part of, in the spiritual aspect of life. And so I decided to leave everything that I was doing, and a couple of years later, I started a foundation, the Federico and Albert Faggin Foundation, to study consciousness, because at that point I had already realized that people that think like me, if they're not thrown out the door, they certainly cannot get any money to actually study what they think is a valid hypothesis. So with that, I began to really think, deeply think, and try to put together all these experiences that I had, all what I knew, into a coherent narrative, into a coherent story, because I realized that without a theory, no one would ever believe, I mean, I'm talking about scientists now, because science today is the new religion, right? So but it's more than religion, because science is subject to the proof of an experiment, which is not the case with most religions. So it was important to me to reach the scientists, which are the ones that can actually begin to understand and deepen this understanding, and deepen the applications of what this means. And scientists need to start with some kind of cogent theory, otherwise you don't get anywhere. You can tell them that there are out-of-body experiences, and they say, come on, it's impossible, and they keep on doing what they were doing before. So this is not without something that you can grab them and say, look at this, look at this, it has to be this way. But you have to have something very strong to be able to do that. And so my direction and desire with the foundation shifted to the creation of a theory that can then be the starting point for a serious investigation on the nature of reality. No longer on the nature of consciousness, but on the nature of reality, because if consciousness is fundamental, we are talking about the nature of reality, not the nature of consciousness, because everything else derives from it. And I stop here, otherwise, again.
Yeah, again, I can't just let you run, but there's so many things that, as we start to slowly make the transition towards the deeper end, I want to just recapitulate a couple of things here, Federico. So When you retrospect over this, it's a bit unusual for someone who isn't hardcore isn't the right word, but who isn't on a spiritual path and really working with their mind, to have these kind of spontaneous openings, which parenthetically on one level, unbelievably, I mean, truly extraordinary. I just delight. On another level, maybe very ordinary. A consequence of when the heart and mind are so open, these become ordinary experiences. But the question I have for you is, what do you think was the initiator or the catalyst to trigger for this opening that you had in Tahoe? I mean, why did it seem to come about so spontaneously? Do you have a sense of what it was that you were doing on your side to invite this degree of opening?
Yeah, I want to understand why I was so unhappy. I wanted to understand, and frankly, it was just to know. It wasn't even because I wanted to be happy. In other words, there was no agenda. I just wanted to know.
Yeah.
I just wanted to understand, and I wanted to also understand what is consciousness, because I was trying to see if I could create a conscious computer, but I couldn't. And so there was a mystery there. I wanted to know.
Yeah.
So it was that desire to know without an agenda about what I would do with what I know.
That's beautiful. And in a certain way, it was iterative or reiterative of some of the conclusions or provisional conclusions that you've come to, that the impulse for evolution altogether that you talk about is in fact just this on a cosmological scale for the universe to become aware of itself, this urge to know. So in a certain sense, that was a personal iteration of that.
Absolutely. I realized that, and also reading, also through the reading that I did from that point on, I realized that was the common thread in all of the, in all of the stuff that I consider important that I read. It was the need of the person to know, the need to know, the desire to know. Who am I? Why? It was the why, the why more than the how. It was the why. And to me, because the how immediately, just when you ask and how, immediately there is there is some sort of, you want to get something there, with the how you want to get something, but the why is like the child, why, daddy, why is that, why, that kind of stuff, is we are born with a big why.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's like the inner child that, if we nurture it properly, is always there to guide us. And what I really love is the open-ended platform that led you to this, and also the open quality of your journey altogether since then, because it's so easy for people to become territorial, provincial, circle the wagons around their particular disciplines. And you have this really unique mercurial, in the best sense, capacity to dance with fluidity between these two worlds. And so now we can start to probe a little bit more deeply about this extraordinary contribution that you are actually making. And I will throw in just a couple little statements to our listeners here that I meant to say at the outset that I didn't. When I had the opportunity to become familiar with Federico's work, we invited him into a consciousness non-duality science study group that I do with scientists and academics. And over the course of a couple hours, we started going into what we're about to transition into here. And I just wanted to say, as a platform for our listeners, that some of the comments that came up through the participants, and also through you, Federico, yourself, is that this view kills materialism, which is what we're not going to further unpack. Everything changes if this theory is proven. It's a new direction for science. It overthrows 300 years of science. And I think I can't remember who said this, is fundamentally cataclysmic as the Michelson-Morley experiment. And so I set this out as a platform, as we now start to go into the deeper end of things, that what I'm starting to see as I try to wrap my mind around the nuance, the elegance, the subtlety, the complexity of your work now, is that instead of running off into lifetime retreat and becoming a yogi, a sannyasa, and just devoting your life to the spiritual vector. What I see as your work now is this really beautiful and courageous marriage, this union, which initially may be a shotgun marriage, right? Of where science and spirituality, exteriority and interiority can actually meet. And so this is an amazing thing when you talk about actually developing a scientific theory of consciousness versus just a metaphysical postulation, something that can be tested. And this is the great contribution here. People may be wondering, oh, this is great. Well, why is this so important? Well, until we convert, or at least start to converse with the high priests of the Western culture, which are the scientists, this particular paradigm will not embrace the validity, the veracity of what the wisdom traditions or what you yourself have explained as a spiritual practitioner. So start to talk to us a little bit more. Again, there's so much to talk about here, but start to talk about a little bit for quantum information based panpsychism 101, right? Why would two things? Why would well, no, actually, let me put a hold on that. The foundations of this particular view and what you think with your work with Dariano, why you think this could be tested, what the implications of this, what it actually means to test this, that sort of thing, so we can start to get into the weeds a little bit, because this is really where your extraordinary contribution lies.
Yes. Okay. So a little bit more of more background. So back to say 10 years ago, it was clear to me that if you start with consciousness as a foundation, then everything changes. But then there is unity. In other words, you can no longer talk about spirituality and materiality as two separate things. And so the spiritual reality that many have explored over the ages, and the material reality that now science is almost exclusively doing, are really two aspects that must join. And in the joining of these two aspects, everyone benefits. Both aspects will be enriched by this joining. And so, it's no longer, you mentioned a shotgun wedding, but this is not a shotgun wedding. This is love that joins.
Beautiful.
Okay, so it was very clear to me that only, and also because I lived that with in that way, I lived it in that way. It's a marvelous opening. All of a sudden we thought we were living in a small shack, and in fact we live in a castle. It's one of those things where all of a sudden the world is much bigger and much vaster, and the capacity that we have to experience are so incredible. And so to me, by opening the eyes a little bit enough so that people can believe that they can put some energy into trying to figure out who they are, we can go beyond, much beyond. And this is especially important when today we are compared with robots, with artificial intelligence. We live in a time when artificial intelligence seems to be able to do what we do, which of course is crazy. Is that because we are not doing enough, because we can do a hell of a lot more than what we do. And it is, in fact, if we can give to artificial intelligence the tasks that we labor every day, we can actually discover this new world. So it's an opportunity instead of being a danger or a challenge. So anyway, this is this sort of mindset that I had. And so now, of course, the other thing that was clear to me even in those days is that only quantum physics can have a hope ever of explaining the nature of consciousness and the nature of free will, which of course goes with consciousness. In those days, I was not making a clear distinction, but frankly, consciousness without free will makes no sense. I mean, it would be like watching a slow motion, train wreck without being able to get out of there, because the world is deterministic, and so you are watching a movie that you cannot do anything about it. So free will is fundamental exactly because consciousness that experiences, that can know, if it has free will, then all of a sudden it can direct its own experience. It can direct its own knowing. It's no longer what comes your way, but you are actually the director, the actor in a world, and also the observer of the world. And to me, that was also very, very important. So when I started, then the type of research that we're doing was all trying to understand more deeply quantum physics at the level of the foundation of quantum physics. If you know a little bit of quantum physics, you know that there is the measurement problem.
Sure.
The measurement problem is the fact that quantum physics describes a reality that mathematically can only be described in what is called Hilbert space, which is a space of n dimensions, in which each dimension is a complex number. A complex number is a number that is made of a real part and an imaginary part. So already you start, your mind start moving away from this if you're not a scientist, because what are n dimensions and complex numbers for each dimension? I mean, what are you talking about? So unfortunately, that's the only mathematics that can actually show how things work, and nobody understands why they work that way. That's another problem. Nobody understands quantum physics. Even the most superb physicist does not understand quantum physics. They know how to use it. They know how to do the computations. They know the rules, but it makes no sense. And the measurement problem is one of these other things that make no sense. A measurement problem means that you describe a reality in this space that is non-physical, is a mathematical space with many dimensions. And then somehow from this reality described in this space, there is what is called the collapse of the wave function. The wave function represents the likelihood that certain things will happen. And many things can happen, but when there is the collapse of the wave function, only one thing of the many things that could happen happens. And so how does that happen? That's a mystery. Nobody has been able to explain how this happens. You simply take it for good. From this n-dimensional space of complex dimensions, you collapse the wave function into the three-dimensional space and time.
And is that done through the act of observation, Federico? So
well, that's some people say that it's through the act of observation. Some people say that it's not. It's simply, they call it the decoherence. Simply from this thing you decohere into that thing. But even if they have a mathematical theory, it's actually completely circular logic. So it doesn't make any sense. Nobody knows why. What does it mean? Okay, now I can tell you that most of those things, most of the collapse of the wave function, decisions of conscious entities that live in a reality much vaster than this reality.
Right. And let's
all of a sudden you can begin to understand what nobody has ever understood. You can actually explain why it has to be that way. It has to be that way because at the foundational reality, there aren't elementary particles or quantum fields, but there are conscious entities that interact with each other.
Yeah.
Conscious entities that interact with each other to know themselves. And these conscious entities emerge from one, the totality of what exists, who wants to know itself through the creation of these many, each being a point of view of itself. Remember what I told you about my experience first,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. So let me, with your kind permission, is it okay if I gently interrupt you for clarification as you go on?
Of course, absolutely.
Because there's so now we're getting into it. This is so rich. So a couple of things before. Oh Lord, I mean, again, so many things are coming up to play here. So when you capitulate isn't the right word, but when you engage in the language of mathematics, do you attribute a supremacy to that level of communication, or do you actually engage it as a skillful means to talk to the high priests? In other words, do you think that there's something special about mathematics, or do you simply use it because, hey, if I don't use that language, then the high priest won't?
Well, let me put it this way. We live in a reality in which there is both laws and freedom. You see, the spiritual person would want, there's only freedom. The physicist wants only laws. Okay, it's both. I mean, you know that. I mean, if you can want all you want, not to fall down when you are on a plane, but you cannot. You are going to fall down whether you like it or not. So there are rules, but there are also freedoms. I can decide that I want to turn right or to turn left, and that decision is not algorithmic. It's a free will decision. There are no formulas that can tell whether I should turn right or should turn left. So you see, so we have to fundamentally to really join spirituality with science. We have to change completely the way that we think, both as a scientist and as a spiritual person.
Exactly.
It cannot be a juxtaposition. A juxtaposition is the shotgun marriage that you were talking about. That doesn't work because it isn't that way. I mean, not because it doesn't work, because reality is both, as rules, but the rules in this theory of mine, the rules are like the syntactical rules of the languages that we use to communicate with each other. They are rules they're not rules imposed by God. They are simply the rules that we have agreed to use, because to communicate with each other, we need to have rules. I cannot change the meaning of symbols without everybody agreeing that this symbol means something or something else. So there has, I cannot, exchange verbs with nouns just like I want to.
Otherwise, you can't play the game.
We have to have rules, but the rules, the key thing is that the rules are not compulsive in the sense that we imagine the rules. The rules are choices that we have made to agree with those rules, and we have to use it because we have agreed to use them. Because we want to communicate, and to communicate, we have to have rules.
That's it. That's exactly where I was going with this. And so again, oh my gosh, Federico, now you're getting me excited.
But you see, Andrew, I mean, this is the point, right? You're making it clear. The point is that once you change the perspective, so fundamentally, everything has to be relooked. And that's why you have to for everything that I tell you, you have 200 things that comes to mind, because and to me, I did this process for the last 12 years, where everything fits. Everything fits. I have an answer to all of those things if you start with this, this idea where instead of, the closest things that you can do as a physicist, you say, if the quantum fields, you assume that the quantum fields are conscious,
Right.
not, from the beginning, the quantum fields, not the particles, the quantum fields, the particles are states of the quantum fields. They are not, you cannot separate them. They are like things, like forms that appear within the quantum field. So they're not, those forms are not conscious. That's why computers are not conscious. They are forms. They're not the fields.
Well, they're perturbations in the field. They're excitations of the field.
Yeah, that's right. They are the waves of the sea, right? But this
and this go and to show you how far this goes. I mean, if we extrapolate that again, I don't want. It's like you said. It's like we're talking about the singularity of reality here. There's so much going on. It's as if, to me, you can extrapolate this and say on one level, just like there's the quantum field, and I want to talk a little bit more about that in a second. There's only the experiencer. An experience is analogous to a particle in relationship to the quantum field. In other words, experience is just a perturbation of the field of the experiencer. And hence, what you're also talking about here is non-duality. This is another way to talk about the relationship of the wave to the particle, subject to object, using this kind of matrix reality.
Yeah, but the crucial thing here, the crucial difference between many of the idealists is that while there is, a field, which is the superposition, just like the quantum superposition of all the fields, there are also an infinity or near infinity of fields that combine with each other to, and create new fields, so that it is a field of fields. And, and so it isn't like where, in some Buddhist tradition where you say, okay, you are a drop that, of water that will, eventually will disappear in the sea, and you lose the identity of being a drop. No, it is, we are parts whole.
Hold on, absolutely, absolutely.
We are parts whole, and we maintain the identity. The identity is what allows us to know that the experience that we are having is our own experience.
Right.
The experience that I'm having is my experience, therefore I can direct it. Right. If you did not have identity, you would not have free will. You wouldn't be able to direct your experience.
But it doesn't here, Federico, here what gets interesting to me, and please, if you're okay with me kind of getting in.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But to me, again, there's just so much here. So to what extent does anthropomorphizing come into play here? Because you're using multivalent terms. When you talk about free will, that then implies agency, that then implies identity. So we have to use frameworks that we can relate to. When you talk about free will, when you talk about identity, how much is that anthropomorphizing what you're trying to describe, or how literal are things like free will and identity to these?
Okay. So this, I mentioned earlier that the starting point is entities that communicate with each other to know themselves. Okay. So the fundamental qualities of these entities, I call these entities seities. Yeah. Seiti is an English word that means de facto being a self, the selfhood. Okay. So, and because I don't want to use the word self, because the word self has all kinds of other meanings, and and so so I use a seldom used. So I did not create my own word, but I use a seldom used word, seiti, in order to express the idea of a entity that has three fundamental properties. One has identity, which is what I said earlier. Identity is the fact that the experience that this entity is having he knows it's his own experience. He is conscious. So conscious means that he has and he can know itself. He can know the world through those experiences. And the third is he has agency. So it means that he can act in the world with free will. So the agency implies free will. Okay.
And so are these seities irreducible? I mean, are these irreducible?
Yes, these seities are irreducible. Exactly that. They are the fundamental. There is a fundamental level of seiti which are called consciousness unit. Yeah. They are like the monads of Leibniz. Okay, so those are the consciousness units that are that essentially are the atomic, if you want to call it that way, or actually atoms are made of particles, but the fundamental fields. The fundamental fields are, that are conscious, however, are these entities called CUs, conscious units, which are seities, but they are the elementary seities that have these three properties. So the consciousness of a seiti is actually a self-consciousness, because they know that they're having an experience. So that is self-consciousness.
And by that you mean it's reflexively aware, right? I mean,
It's
that's
reflectively aware, yeah. And so, and the substance of which all the seitis are built is the substance of one, which is, goes back to my experience where everything is made of one thing, right?
Exactly. And so when you had that experience, again, I get so excited, I have to interrupt you. So when you had this experience, which I was just literally, it was like a mind meld. I was just so there with you. You had the experience of the light, and then it came up and it exploded into this multifarious display of scintillating points of light, which, by the way, parenthetically, Federico, this is a very classic description of particular qualities of mind within the wisdom traditions. Would you therefore attribute those the sparkles, for lack of a better term, when you had that phenomenological experience? Was that an experience of the seities? Were you actually directly experiencing those little dots of light as these consciousness units?
No, I didn't know what they were, but now I could say that most likely those were the sort of the reflection of individual there were innumerable points of light, and each point of light would be a seiti. I mean,
exactly. Each point of light was the seiti. So you were actually getting a glimpse. I mean, it's so difficult to put into words, because you're having a non-dual experience. You're trying to put it in a dualistic framework, which is on one level language, on another level is even the mathematics itself. But the phenomenological display, when you had that radiant 4th of July burst, you would then, I just want to make sure I'm understanding you, attribute that this particular scintillating white light, what the wisdom traditions call bindus, basically mind pearls, distillations of the concentration of light.
Yeah.
And they would also say that, just like, and this is where it's so beautiful, that this is in fact the fabric of reality. I mean, reality in this languaging is quite literally made of this type of frozen light, which is the light of the mind that is in fact reflexively aware. So let me ask you this.
No, it's not a frozen light. It's a living light.
No, this becomes a
living light.
Yeah, but we're the ones that kill it. Yeah. We're the ones that freeze it when we reify what we see in the phenomenal world, right? So basically, you were seeing the atomistic nature of the luminous display of the mind as these points of light, these bindus, correct?
Yes.
And so let me ask you this, and please accept my apologies.
But to be completely honest, I did not realize that at that time. I mean, I can tell you now this, but you see, all those experiences, little by little, reveal what was simply, an experience, but I could then begin to connect the dots, so to speak, and understand the whole thing. Exactly. That's exactly what each of us has to do. I mean, we cannot stop. We cannot just we cannot say, okay, that's it. That's it, and then we put a boundary around this is all. And that's why I did not want to be. To take too seriously what anyone would say in books, because if you do that, then you become a sectarian. You end up following a guru or following something. I don't want to be a guru. I don't want to, and I don't want to follow a guru. Yeah, I mean, we are all free. We need to be free. You see?
This is fantastic. And again, I always say parenthetically here, Federico, we always have to remember the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, Christ wasn't a Christian. So these ists and these isms that we all fall into, they're just byproducts of these amazing individuals who simply opened up. And you're, again, this beautiful mercurial capacity to not get pigeonholed, not slide down into an it is. You're more a curist. I mean, that's the way I define myself. I'm a curist. I'm intensely curious.
Absolutely. See, I mean, the closeness of typically the human mind, even in the religion sense, is that many religions define God as omniscient. If God were omniscient, it would know everything. That it would be nothing else to know. It would be done. So,
Right.
to me, the first thing that one has to be open, because he wants to know itself, and the more he knows, the more there is to know. Exactly like we're displaying now here. The more you know, the more there is to know, because the more connections can be made, in different ways, and some make sense and some don't. And so
And so when you had this again, this is just fantastic. So when you had this experience, because here's what I want to do, with your permission, Federico, is dance between the humanities and the sciences, between science and spirit, which is really what you're doing. Maybe we can do it even in the course of this conversation, where I want to go back and forth between your experiences and now this extraordinary capacity to describe it in languaging and scientific terms that can be of profound benefit to talking to these priests. So one question here is, when you had this grand opening, can you retrospect, was there in fact an experience of matter in that opening, or was matter subsequent to the opening? In other words, when you were in the experience, it was again, don't let me put words in your mouth, but this experience of radiant, diffuse, self-knowing, self-aware, reflexive light. My intuition was at that point, you could say it was all spirit. And again, I'm not sure. There was no matter. Where was matter in that? Was matter consequence of that after the minute when you came back?
Well, there was no matter there. I mean, I can say that, clearly. It was all experience. There was no matter. But in my theory, matter is simply what we call the symbols that we use to communicate with each other.
Exactly.
Okay. So we call matter, and we basically confuse the symbol with the meaning. Okay, so from the science point of view, there are only symbols that interact with each other. They will be like the words that interact with each other in the gazillions of books that are written. But from a spiritual point of view, there is only experience, but there is nothing else. And that is not true, because we know, because we communicate. We know more of each other because we communicate. If we are parts whole, I have the totality of one inside of me. And so I have to discover who I am, which in so doing, I discover for one, because I'm not separate from one. I'm an integral part of one that wants to know itself, and in knowing itself, one knows itself. But the way that one knows itself is like in a quantum system. It is much more than the sum of the knowing of all the parts. The parts whole that he is. You see that he. Sorry, we don't have this. It,
right.
whatever,
Yes.
it, she, whatever.
Right.
So we basically, here to really drive in this idea of part whole. I have to say another thing. Our body is built the same way. Each cell of my body is a part whole of the body, of the totality, because the genome inside each of my 50 trillion cells is the same genome of the egg that created the total organism.
Right. Beautiful.
So you see the same pattern is repeated over and over at different scales.
Like a fractal.
So
exactly.
We are cells of one, the same way that each cell of my body is a part whole of my entire body.
Yeah, it's the self-similarity principle in chaos theory.
Yes.
Right? The fractal.
It's the fractal, it's the fractality, but also the of holography, where a part of the whole contains the whole. Even in a hologram, in an hologram, you take a portion of the hologram, you illuminate with coherent light, and you see the whole. And the smaller is the part, the less detail there is in the whole, but it's still the whole.
So let's come back, because this to me, this is so important what we're talking about here. Again, joining your experience with your beautiful theory. Help me out a little bit. Help me understand a little bit more, Federico. So when you're in this experience of tremendous opening and radiant light, and you saw the affective expression, it was made of love, so beautiful, really, and so spot on. How did matter then crystallize, materialize, germinate from this openness experience? Because if it was only consciousness at that point, there was no experience of matter. After that 1 minute thing, you came back to reality or whatever this is. At that point, you had returned to the so-called material world. So what therefore, you're kind of circumambulating this. What therefore is the relationship of this opening to matter? And say more about how we can now relate to matter. Because when we talk about materialism versus spiritualism, that always is the big thing. What is matter in both your experience and in your view, your theory?
Matter are the symbols that we use to communicate that are perceived by another symbol, which is the body, that transforms those symbols into an experience which is not felt by the body, but is felt by a system which can only be described, is a sati that doesn't exist in the physical world, but exists in a vaster world that contains, so to speak, the physical world. So the physical world is like a reduction of a vaster reality. Yeah. Okay, it's like a plane, or a plane is a reduction of a three-dimensional space. It's like the body exists, the physical body exists in a plane, but our consciousness exists in a three-dimensional world. And so what we see in the plane, is not, it's only a portion of what actually exists.
Fantastic. And so can you therefore say, just to gain clarity on this, because this is so important, so where does matter then have or have not ontology? Is it only epistemology, or does matter actually have ontology in this view?
Well, it has ontology to the extent that not being separate from the field, being a form in the field, it retains a connection with the field. It's not separate. Okay. So, but it is a form. So its consciousness, if you say that this matter is conscious, is really the consciousness of the field. It's not the consciousness of the form.
So is matter therefore, is the languaging proper to say that it is the effulgence, the expression of the field? I mean, is that a Louise?
I look at it this way. My body is a symbol, but is not a classical symbol, like a bit of a computer. Okay, my body is actually a quantum and classical system, the like of which science has yet to recognize, because science has studied biology as if it was biochemistry, as if it was classical. Instead, each cell is a quantum and classical system.
And so it dances between those two worlds.
It is a bridge between the world of classical matter, which is the world of computers that can never be conscious. Right. They can never have free will. Right. If they have free will, is the will of the person that through the little back door of the computer controls the computer. Okay. and that's where this is the big lie that people in AI are perpetrating, so to speak, because they tell you that that their AI can be autonomous, and it can do stuff by itself. Come on, this is completely wrong. Okay, and because that's a major deception that we need to really be aware of. But go back to what I was we were saying. So actually I forgot what I was saying.
Well, we were talking about whether matter has any ontology, and then I was actually asking, is it safe to say that we can relate to matter as an effulgence, an expression, a radiance of
Okay.
that foundation.
Thank you. So I was about to say that my body is a symbol which I control. But I am not the body. I am that sati that exists in this vaster reality. So this symbol exists as a form in my field. So, but because I believe to be the body, or at least a portion of who I am believes to be the body, we have reified that symbol and we think that that is reality. And of course, reify means real meaning reality, right? So the moment that we begin to disidentify with that, then we can actually have experiences which are holistic experiences, because we no longer perceive reality through the information that the body has captured in this informational field and transform into what consciousness, my sati consciousness, limited to believing that it is the body, pays attention to.
Yeah.
So in other words, how do I explain my extraordinary experience of consciousness, my first extraordinary experience of consciousness? For a while, I let go of the identification with the body, and I was able to experience, directly who I am.
Yeah.
Who I am. Okay. And so all of a sudden, I got a glimpse. I let go. It was no longer. So in other words, my ego was able to directly perceive the vaster self that I am.
Yeah, but isn't it also fair to say here, Federico, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, when you say you discovered your truer self, wouldn't it be more accurate, again, correct me, wouldn't it be more accurate to say that you actually discovered the extraordinary bandwidth of yourself? In other words, because what happens then to the relative sense? Otherwise, if you're taking ultimate refuge in this true identity, then there's this cosmological dualism that is born. There could be a potential disparaging of the world of form. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, but you see, I think that I'm here to do a job. So, in other words, now I know that, and now I know without question, that when my body dies, I'm not going to die.
That's exactly where I was going to go.
Yeah.
Same about that, because this, again, now we're coming back to the so-called soteriological value here.
Yeah.
This isn't just metaphysics. But
since the body is my creation, I'm here to do a job that I want to do. Now I can actually understand more deeply, what did I come here to do?
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. And the death thing is, I thought that was one of the really beautiful contributions and consequences of this work. That it's basically, you had an intimation. In fact, you died. I mean, it really was a near-death experience. And then you came back due to whatever patterns. And now, it helps you illuminate, articulate your so-called charter and mission. And so let me go back to one thing here, or several things. There's so much here. One is, for someone new at this point, we have to be a little careful with roadkill, right? I mean, it's like, geez, I was with you up until the lights came out, but now I'm lost. There are so many moving parts here. When we talk about the irreducibility, and I believe you're actually, one of your next books is titled that, the irreducibility being the seities, the conscious units. Is there therefore a directionality or reducibility to that, or are these processes somehow co-emergent? Do they mutually enact each other? I mean, to what extent can we go down? Because here then there's the red flag, and maybe it isn't a flag of reductionism. So, basically reducing things to these fundamental.
There is something true about reductionism in this theory, and it is that there are individual seities that have their own identity. So the identity of the seities, you can look at it as separate from the identity of another seities, but we are all part wholes. You see, materialism is not completely wrong, and spiritual people, in the general sense, without, there are exceptions, but, are not completely right. You need to bring them together. Science, is right when they say how things work, but they're only concerned about the functioning of things, where spiritual people are only concerned about the comprehension and the living of it, the living themselves, the life aspect that can know itself by living. And of course, ultimately, that's what gives you joy, or or hanks or whatever. But is consciousness. I mean, but also for science, you have to be conscious to be able to understand. But because scientists typically don't think that consciousness is anything special, they take it for granted. They take for granted their capacity to have intuition, to formulate thoughts, to have feelings. Or maybe if only a feeling of right or wrong. But they take it for granted. But once you have an experience that opens up, Pandora's box, like it happened with me, that there is much more, that now we are the universe. We are not separate entities that when the body dies, we're gone, which is what scientists are saying.
Right. So say a little bit more about, I love this, again, this is another reason I'm so drawn to your work, because it's so resonant with my favorite view, which isn't so tricky, which is an integral view, integral theory, integral ways of relating to, holons, that everybody is true but partial. And therefore the charter is to honor and incorporate the truth, and then centrifuge out the chaff, really get to the quick. And so therefore, when we do that, and again, don't let me put words in your mouth, then in fact, we may find gentle bridges. We may find commonalities of language and experience where the scientists can actually communicate with the spiritual practitioners at these foundational levels, and therefore cross-pollinate between those two, and really create bridges that arguably have never been created before. So,
but absolutely, because that is how one can know itself more and more, is because if I can get your experience through communication, because I cannot get your experience directly. I can only get your experience if you tell me with your symbolically, which symbols is information that can be shared. Experience cannot be shared. Is unique mine, like is unique yours, and I cannot share it. I can only share with symbols, which symbols are classical information, and the experience is quantum information. And that is the essence of the theory with Dariano. Essentially, quantum information is non-clonable. Is a theorem of quantum physics that quantum information cannot be reproduced, cannot be known. And what we said is that, but it can be known by the system which is in that state. You see?
Oh, yeah.
It cannot be known by anybody, but it can be known by the system which is in that state. We are the first one to say, there it is, man. Quantum information is non-clonable because it is not information. It represents an experience. It represents an inner, it represents the qualia and the experience and the knowing that comes through the qualia.
Yeah, and so this is, now we're getting to the real genius. So now we're talking about this issue of interiority, why it is that artificial intelligence should not be conflated with artificial consciousness and sentience, which will never happen, because these systems can never have interiority.
Yes.
So by this definition, we're talking about that. Yeah. So when you use, again, for clarity, quantum is another one of these polysemous terms, multivalent term. When you're using quantum and you say consciousness is quantum, can you be you're starting to intimate this and its relationship to information. Can you be perhaps a little bit more articulate, or help
Yes.
me understand what you mean by that?
Let me be more articulate. Okay. So because your experience can only be known by you, it can never be even put in a piece of mathematics. You had asked me earlier about mathematics, what relationship and so on, right? So the only thing, the best thing that mathematics can do is to create a symbolic representation of an experience which cannot be described, if not by you. But even you cannot copy your experience. Even you need to use shareable symbols to express your experience. But the shareable symbols are not the experience. They are only tokens of your experience. And therefore, and not only that, but in quantum physics, when you have a quantum system in a quantum state, the maximum information that you can get by measuring that system is 1 bit per qubit, per quantum bit. A quantum bit represents an infinity of states, while the bit represents 0 or 1, one of 2 possible states. So the shareable information is always an enormous reduction of what the experience is, which has the dimension of infinity, where the dimension of the symbols is finite and very small finite, 1 or 0.
And so this is where the whole probabilistic thing comes in, and the collapse.
Then there is no collapse of the wave function in the way it was understood. The collapse of the function is free will, and then there is no quantum information, because the quantum information represents an experience. There is only experience. You see.
Yeah. And so therefore, oh gosh, again, I get so excited. So is it facile, Federico, to say, because I'm always so interested in the my languaging kind of ontic plasticity, exactly what you talked about in your experience when you Federico dissolved into a radiant ball of loving light, and then because of habit patterns or whatever, you crystallized back into form/matter. I'm always extraordinarily interested, again, in this relationship of what we call mind, spirit, and matter. Is it too facile to say, we're talking about on one level, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, the only thing we really ever have is experience. I mean, that's it, hard stop. Is it too facile to say that matter is the word we append to the regularity of experience? Is that something that's too facile to say?
No, matter is the word we append to the regularity of the symbols that we use to communicate our experience.
There we go. That's even more refined. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there may be, in Chinese box style, a reality inside another reality inside another reality.
Yeah.
Which some of the esoteric traditions are telling us, for example, that we have an astral body or a etheric body or whatever, of a mental body. So, at this level of my knowing, I say that within this theory, it is possible, but, that's all that can be said scientifically at this point. But
so what is that? Again, now we're getting to, I love the granularity here. So centrifuge out for me how this is not idealism, and how and why you call this quantum information-based panpsychism.
So because unfortunately, any time that we put things in a box, we become philosophers, and we never stop arguing. I'm actually not that interested, because in some ways, each one of us has to find out for themselves what the hell is going on. And so, even the moment that you put things in the boxes, then you start arguing about, but is it? And you cannot do that, because there are no boxes. Beautiful. Everything is connected with everything else. So all the boxes have holes that connect with the other boxes. And so, and to know is to actually know, how to connect the boxes with each other. Right. And that's what real knowledge is, and real knowing is. Right. To know the total, the wholeness that we are, the wholeness in the sense of, the indivisibility that we are.
It reminds me of this parable. I can't remember where I heard it, where God and the devil are walking along a path, and God sees this incredibly beautiful thing shimmering on the ground, and the devil picks it up and says, "I'm going to name it," right?
Yeah, that's right.
Or,
Yeah, but I
but we
already
have to. The devil doesn't
we
negate
have
that.
to. You see,
Yeah,
we cannot non-name if we want to communicate.
exactly.
But
Exactly.
but the devil is when he named it, that he believed that the name was the thing that he named.
Exactly.
That is the problem.
You confuse the map with the
You
territory.
confuse symbols with meaning.
Yeah.
And in fact, in physics, information is only symbols without meaning, is only a probability, has nothing to do with meaning.
And therefore,
Now, in this theory with Dariano, okay, all of a sudden, the meaning is what we have called quantum information. And the symbols, are what we have called classical, the bits. They are the shareable information is the symbolic aspect, because in order to communicate, we need to sort of collapse without with the same meaning, not the same meaning of quantum physics, but collapse a rich experience into a symbolic thing, which is always much smaller, like a name. If I say to you chocolate, and you never tasted a chocolate, it doesn't mean anything. And even if I tell you, I give you a sentence that explains what the chocolate tastes like, if you never tasted, you cannot recreate the taste of chocolate in your mouth.
Yeah. You can't.
Only if you experience the chocolate, then when I say chocolate, you get it.
Yeah.
But you have to know this. But you have to know what the symbol means before you understand the symbols. If I give you a symbol, see, people get it all wrong. They think that the symbol is the meaning.
Yeah, and the symbol is always pointing, right? Even if it's pointing to itself.
The symbol is a pointer. It's a pointer.
So Federico, how I'm going to do two things. One from a scientific perspective again, and then back to the spiritual perspective. How can this be falsifiable? How can this be tested? What are you and Dariano cooking up in terms of actually bringing this into the labs and testing this?
Well, I mean, the first set of tests that you do, right, is there are the sort of mental experiments that you can do in your mind, and I've done many for the last several years. Well, this theory is about 2 years old, maybe 3, in terms of the first glimpses, and then it was published for the first time a year and a half ago. In archive, and then on a book last year, so 9 months ago. So it's very, very fresh, very new, and we have not gotten lots of comments yet, and that's a good thing, because it means that they're still thinking, they're trying to figure out how to shoot it down, right? Yeah, so far so good, but you can be assured that it will be a barrage of guns, smoking pretty soon. And, I expect that, but it doesn't matter. Whatever happens. But the point is that in my mind, I can actually explain many of the extraordinary experiences that I have with this theory, and theories that experiences that I've read about. So where you cannot explain any of that stuff with physics the way we understand physics today. You cannot explain out-of-body experiences. You cannot explain near-death experiences. You cannot explain all kinds of psychic experiences. You cannot explain the dreams. You cannot. I mean, all kinds of things. So I'm pretty comfortable that at the level, at the sort of qualitative level, this theory, is held together. So, but scientifically, this is not good enough. So what kind of experiments do we need to do, to prove it? I'm not sure that we can prove it directly, for the very reason that quantum information is not clonable, like in the experience. So you cannot know it. You say, well, I think it's that way. Well, but you cannot prove it. So, but we can definitely prove it indirectly. So by figuring out an experiment, which we don't have yet, but we will, this was one of the top priorities in my list of things to figure out the crucial experiment. In other words, a simple experiment, where the theory today says it will be this way, and our theory says it will not be this way. And then you make this crucial experiment, and you find that it will be this way or that way. And then, you have the first step forward, just the Michelson-Morley experiment that, said, if the ether exists as a substance, then if you do this experiment, it should work this way. And if it doesn't exist, it should work this other way. So you make the experiment, and you find that there is no ether, because it worked that way instead of this way.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And often, the people that create this experiment believe that it would be the way that actually turns out to be wrong. It's interesting. It happened also. It happened also with, for example, with entanglement, which is a property of quantum systems that doesn't exist for classical systems, and which is the property that allows parts to combine and create something which is more than the sum of the parts. That is entanglement, and which doesn't exist in classical systems. And so entanglement, the sort of the test was Bell. The Bell theorem, or Bell test is called, that set a limit on the correlations possible with classical system. And lo and behold, quantum systems had much higher level of correlation that were possible if you had a classical system. So and Bell thought that reality was classical, like Einstein. Einstein was a realist. He thought that the reality had to be deterministic, and and so quantum physics was not sufficient, was not complete.
And so is it, again, this is such delicate, tricky terrain, because on one level, I mean, someone suggested this, Federico, like how amenable, if it's non-clonable, how amenable are these experiences, and even your theory itself, to verification? Do you need?
I think the only way to verify it is to have an extraordinary experience of consciousness.
Exactly. And so
but it's the only way we know, Andrew.
Yeah.
It's the only way we know. So if scientist stops worrying about and being philosophical about it, or hard about it, open yourself and ask yourself, and you will find out.
And this is what leads to my next question is how psychoactive is this view? So for instance, Diariano, I don't know, maybe he didn't have the types of experiences that you have. Has in fact his study of this been psychoactive? Has he in fact used this map to lead to the territory? By exploring this, can you actually have the experience?
Well, frankly, my view on using drugs to enter into extraordinary experience of consciousness is I'm not so convinced that you could trust what you experience. Basically you are changing the chemistry of your brain. And
you're talking about psychedelics now, yes? Psychedelics,
or all kinds of psychoactive drugs, right? Psilocybin and
let me clarify my question. I think this is my problem. When I say psychoactive, I mean psychoactive in a generic term. In
Oh, I
other
see.
words,
I thought
yeah, that was,
I chose
no, that was my bad, my lack of articulation. So when I'm talking about psychoactive, I'm talking about when you engage in the study. So like I used the example of Dariano, he probably didn't, or he doesn't.
Well, no, that I mean, he told me they never had any such experience, but he trusted me enough that, most physicists, if I tell my experience, they say, well, what the fuck,
Yeah, you're
sorry,
right.
my French, but
Right.
I mean, I mean, what are you talking about? Come on, get out of here. He trusted me enough to, even if he couldn't understand it because I was describing chocolate that he never tasted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
but you seem to be talking about this. I'm hearing two contradictory things. You seem to be talking about, and I agree with you here, the so-called supremacy of the experience. But yet, how will this theory lead them to that experience? Or can it? And that's what I mean by psychoactive.
No. The theory does not lead you to any experience. It leads you to get off your, your idea. The reality is what described by your other theory.
Yeah.
So open yourself up to find out.
Yeah, it could be that. It could be.
I mean, the scientists today don't want to test any of the, I mean, how could we test that you had an out-of-body experience? They don't want to find out.
Yeah.
Most of them. I mean, there are some that do, but if they ask them, nobody gives them money. But there are those people, and those are the ones that I fund with my foundation to explore things, and especially things that will lead to convincing people that they should open up to experience. Because if I don't believe something, I will never experience what I don't believe that exists.
Exactly. Yeah. And so therefore it really is, it really could be a kind of stealth help. You're inserting these psychoactive substances via the view that can be a potential paradigm shifter. They could put a crowbar in there, mixing another metaphor, and actually potentially make them walk away and say, well, wait a second, I need to think about this. And again, then that type of reflection could initiate a psychoactive transformation.
I mean, it happened to me, right? I wanted to know.
Exactly.
I wanted to know, and I wanted to know not to write a paper, not to make money, not to look myself in the mirror and say how great you are. I just wanted to find out because I was suffering, because I was not happy, and I have done what scientists were telling you, that if you have checked all those boxes, you should be happy.
Yeah, and right there should be the first thing. And so briefly, you mentioned this, but just very briefly, why do you think scientists are afraid of exploring paranormal OBEs and that sort of thing? Do you think there's a fear ingredient there? I mean, a little sidebar, but why do you think the resistance, the fear of scientists to go into these dangerous?
Well, because there have been many inconsistency in religions, right? I mean, religions that preach, they preach love, and then they go to war, right? I mean, things like that. So a scientist is paramount and logical animal, so to speak. And it cannot take seriously anybody that is incoherent, logically incoherent. Is a rational person. He wants to find out. He wants to know. He wants to be sure. But again, he doesn't realize yet that even the sureness of an experiment is not enough, because you're sure that it works the way you describe, but what is behind? Again, go back to the beginning when I was making the distinction between how and why. The why can be completely different than the how.
Yeah.
And scientists right now, they're only interested in the how.
Yeah.
And they have essentially abandoned the field of experience and intuition, and it doesn't belong to science. That's because consciousness has been defined as epiphenomenal, meaning it does not exist.
Yeah, and it's also, to me, it's also a revelatory of their unwillingness to engage in broad empiricism, where you think that the only way you can know reality is through these particular.
You asked about, I didn't finish answering you, but you ask about fear, and the fear of the scientist is the fear of being condemned by the community of scientists to which they belong. So if there is a fear, it's the fear of being basically
thrown out of the club.
get out of the club, to which they belong very proudly. And so that's that fear is enormous, and it's like being extradited, or exile, right? And so it's their home after all this construction, which is beautiful in one way, but it's incomplete, because it doesn't take into account the heart. It doesn't take into account the courage. It doesn't take into account, the deeper capacities that we have. And so they are short-changing themselves.
Absolutely. And I think
but, need to be, but in order to take seriously anything, they need to be convinced at least to try, and to try. I mean, it's not going to be easy. You may have to work at it for years. I mean, in some ways, I had been praying to understand for 10 years, so to speak, before I had that experience, but I didn't know it, because I didn't know that I was praying. I wanted to know, why am I suffering? Why, why I bring this, heavy load inside of me? What's going on here? I've done everything right. It still doesn't work, right? I mean,
Federico, this is really beautiful. And again, I love the way we're dancing, and hopefully not, especially from my end as a dilettante, between these two worlds. But again, putting on the spiritual hat back on for a second, it's allegedly the Buddha himself said, I teach one thing and one thing only: suffering and the end of suffering. And so what I see is your work that, again, I just want to applaud. This is quite remarkable, is your willingness to actually try to talk to the boys' club, to the high priests, using the vocabulary.
You mentioned suffering. I cannot not say something about, because there are religions when they want the end of suffering. But to me, suffering is the gate to knowing. Because if you are fat, damn, and happy, you don't want to know anymore. You're happy and live your happiness. But suffering is when something doesn't match your expectation. You're not. There's something that you don't know, that you don't understand about yourself. And so you suffer, or you suffer physically, whatever. But the point is that suffering, to me, is the only way in which we have the motivation to find out. But if you want to find out only because you want to stop suffering, it's not going to work. Because
but at what level is what you're doing?
I never know. I wanted to know. See, that is the difference. I did not, I could continue to fake. I could continue to fake that I was happy. Okay. I was quite successful in doing that, in faking that I was, but if you're honest with yourself, you say, no, I'm suffering and I'm faking it.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I wanted to know why I was suffering. Not because I wanted to stop it. Of course, I mean, fine. I mean, if it will go away, but that was not my intent. That was not what was in my mind. Why? Because I was believing that reality was the way physicists were, have taught me. So I know that when I die, I will stop suffering anyway, because I don't exist anymore, right? I mean, so that's the way. That's the way to stop suffering, is with death.
And so again, we're on the same page there, totally. Let me just ask you one question very specifically about that, and then I want to transition into one little thing, and I also want to be very respectful of your time. So a couple of things, Federico. So again, now we're somewhat fearless question. So at the end of this particular body-mind matrix that we know as Andrew, Federico, this will dissolve. This view can help one perhaps alleviate some sense of fear and discord at the end. Like our friend Bernardo says so beautifully, death is the end of the whirlpool, the dissociation, but the stream continues. So have you conjectured, is it worth your time in your own experience to conjecture what then happens after the transition into the dissolution process, like the so-called after-death experience, and what may or may not constellate after that?
I don't entertain very much this type of sort of,
Metaphysical questions, yeah.
Well, speculations, if you want, right? I mean, basically, I had already seen in the report of near-death experiences of I read probably many hundreds of them over the years. There is a common thread, and I expected most likely, but my experience will be the same. So in other words, you wake up, into another reality. You probably first. In fact, I had, now I forgot, but I actually had, I had the memory of of dying. I lived through the memory of dying. I was killed, and I saw myself, out of the body, looking down at my dead body and say, wow, it's still me. I'm alive. Wow. And that was the end of the experience. Okay. So that experience, was also relatively early, probably 2 or 3 years after the awakening. But already the awakening had taken away any fear of death. But that experience was actually very precise. I'm out of body. I look at myself on the body there, and I recognize that I'm alive and that my body is dead. Okay, but I did not go anywhere. So it was simply recognizing that I passed, and so that experience took all the fear of death out of my system, and so there is no. To me, I don't need to speculate. I will find out when I get there what I need to know. I mean, because there is so much to do right now that to spend my time to speculate about something that when I'm not here, I would consider. I'm a practical man, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's fantastic. And the fact that your practicality has taken you, that's the other thing about this, a kind of transcendental pragmatism, it lends beautifully. So let me ask you this, Federico.
Well, I see, just a second, I see a light here that is
okay.
illuminating me, but it's not the light that we were talking about earlier. So let me move move myself to a different area. I don't know my my way to my son's home here.
Right.
But anyway, so now it's better. So
Yeah, nice synchronicity.
Yeah.
So to what extent, if any, and then I know I'm starting to just pepper a couple of different things out between these two worlds. A lot of my listeners will be interested. To what extent, if any, do the wisdom traditions still interest you? I mean, is it like a been there, done that thing in your study of these contemplative wisdom traditions? Or do you still find yourself picking up a text now and again just to see what somebody else may have to say about this? Because the reason I say this is because on one level, your experience is incredibly beautiful, rich, a standalone type of experience. But on another level, you say this in your appendix that you're on one level, the Vedas talked about this thousands of years ago. So on one level, it's nothing new. And so to what extent do the wisdom?
I have read enough books about other traditions to get the sense of it. So I would consider wasting my time now to keep on going back to the same reading.
Sure.
Because everybody kind of casts this thing in a certain way, but I can recognize that 80% of what they say is right on with my experience. And it's not 80% of what I thinking or what I read, is 80% with my experiences, because I said early on, the foundation for me is what I have experienced and what I can extrapolate from my experiences. And so I'm not too interested to do a
Comparative analysis. Yeah.
comparative analysis, to do,
Sure.
that is not my life. My life is to find a way to describe a potential reality so well that young people, not even, I don't care the older people, young people will be motivated, will be encouraged, will be inspired to find out for themselves. Yeah. Because they are the future. I'm not interested in converting an 80-year-old physicist that believes that I'm full of shit.
Good luck.
That is not my that is not a, I don't care. I want young people, because those are the ones that will carry the the light forward, if they get any light from or enlightenment for my discussions.
And that's exactly where I was going to go. I mean, your prescient statements here. Why would someone be interested in this who's not a scientist? So let's go a little bit more to that. So you're trying to reach either overtly or covertly a younger population. You're not going to do it with the articles that I read, right? They're so scientific. I mean, again, I'm bowing to that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, the specificity. But what do you see as ways of communicating this, in fact, to this population that could inspire them to look at this, that could inspire them to be, so to speak?
Exactly what I'm doing right now, right? Exactly. I mean, I'm not giving you a PowerPoint presentation of my article, right? I gave you the basic ideas, but to hardcore physicists that are open, that article is important, because it is saying that this is a coherent way of looking at reality. And in fact, he explains what before they could not explain themselves. So that could be the doorway for them to open themselves up to experience and to find out for themselves. Because ultimately, as I said, you can only know by direct experience. I believe that.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that, look, 1 minute experience changed my life. What else, I mean, for the better, you can have 1 minute experience that changes your life because you die, but that's right. That's another story. But I'm talking about something so powerful that actually can change the course of one life.
Yeah.
And that is what it means to actually experience and to know directly through the way that we have to know, which science doesn't believe is the way to know, because the only way to know with scientists is to a theory that makes a prediction and you verify the prediction with an experiment. That is the only way to know.
Exactly. And this is what I was alluding to earlier about the extraordinary limitations of not only scientism, but this lack of broad empiricism, that the only way to know mind reality is through these really constricted myopic kind of mechanisms. And so with that said, Federico, to what extent, if any, and I don't know any other languaging, but does praxis, is there, because you talk about and I'm completely with you on this, the so-called supremacy of experience, and fundamentally that's all you ever have anyway. So to what extent do you either directly or indirectly try to cultivate that experience? Are there things that you do to help you to stabilize them, to reestablish them, to propagate them? Do you in fact have a praxis around this?
Well, for the last 5 years, my discipline is writing. Here, I wrote 2 books, and I'm working on 2 more right now, and it is only through writing that I enter in a form of meditation, a meditative way, in which new ways to understand, new ways to to parse come to me, and that's wonderful. I mean, there is nothing more enjoyable than all the hours that I spend, and I spend many hours doing that. a day. So, in a good day, I can write for 10 hours.
Wow.
And if I could do it, I would do it every day to write for 10 hours because I love it. I love it.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that as well, because it's, again, somewhat in the spirit of your whole approach, that it's so easy to become locked into a particular mode. Again, a non-integral approach, that this is the way to do it. You have to meditate, you have to do this. And I love the fluidity that you bring to your whole approach. And that, in fact, on one level, I see this dialogue as a type of practice. I see my own writing as a type of practice.
Absolutely.
All these skillful means
life itself become practice. So for me, writing gives me joy. Really, it gives me joy. And writing is actually the combination of rationality and experience, because and openness to new ideas, to different ways of looking at things, and also the laborious process that we have to transform intuitions into something that works, something that actually functions properly. So, which is science. And so there is science, and there is the spiritual part, which is the intuitive part, the illumination part that comes through that process. So I'm actually practicing what I preach.
Yeah, I completely agree. As a writer, and also as a musician, you get into these flow states.
Same thing, absolutely.
Personal zones and it's a wonderful dance where you open and you realize, and Bernardo says about his own work, as do many great artists, that I didn't write that book. I didn't compose that symphony. I just got out of the way.
Yeah.
And something came through, the daemon came through. And so it's a wonderful dance between these spectrums of our own being, that we have the part that still has to download it and put it in symbolic form and get it into the world, but yet we open into these larger dimensions where then it kind of, dare we say, channels, right?
Yeah.
Big word.
Yeah, and it is a work of love toward myself and toward the world, because I do something that will then be given out into the world.
Yeah, giving birth to it. That's really beautiful. Well, as we start to close up, because again, when your next books are out and I read them, we have to do this again. Talk to us. One of your great gifts. We've been circumambulating this issue. Maybe we can be a little bit more specific. I'm extremely interested. One of my passions in life is discovering, like Socrates, allegedly the difference between you and me, as I know that I don't know. In other words, blind spots. I'm really interested in discovering what it is that I don't see, the cataracts of confusion. So from your perspective, you intimated that spirituality has strengths and weaknesses, science has strengths and weaknesses. We've been going after the science a little bit. Say a little bit more about what you see as the blind spots of the contemplative traditions. And on one level, I'm putting you in an impossible situation, because who is anybody to have the kind of that hubris to say that? But at the same time, you are uniquely situated to have this kind of perspective, because you've had the experiences, you dance between these worlds. So could you say a little bit more, if you're comfortable, about what you see from your perspective as some of the blind spots of the non-dual traditions?
Very simply, it is the idea of taking themselves out of the world, going to a monastery or into a cave, and basically only concentrating on the inner aspect of self and not on the rest, in the interaction with others, and basically separating exactly what should not happen. I am part of the world. I live in the world, and I share with the world. But I'm not trying to use me as a good example. I'm simply saying that, in my experience, by putting myself into uncomfortable places, like starting companies and having to learn new things that I never knew if I could even learn or not, was a risky business, and I put myself in doing what I'm doing now, for Christ's sake. I mean, I'm probably, all of my credits have been discredited now because of what I'm saying, so
You're talking to people like me.
yeah, that's right. So what the hell, right? So, but to me, that is what is fundamental. Living fully, so to speak, not becoming isolated, becoming part of a sect or part of a sort of a of a
Ossified tradition.
where you begin isolate, you find other people like you, they think like you, and you become sort of, someone like, we are better than the other guys without saying it, but in fact, that's what you do, right? We are special because we can do it this way, but those other guys do it that way. No, that's not the way to do it. I mean, come on, this is bullshit as far as I'm concerned. So spirituality, when it does that, they do exactly what they claim that they shouldn't be doing, or what they hate about the world, so to speak. Spirituality. In fact, many scientists do the same thing. They only talk to other scientists. They think that they know better than everybody else, and they don't want to share anything because they don't understand anyway, and we know it all, kind of thing. And that's not good, and that's really not what we're here to do, as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, a high five on that one, Federico, because really, especially in this day and age when the world is on fire, I mean, it's all hands on deck. And right now, it's really, I couldn't agree more with you. It's really applied spirituality. If you can't take these things and bring them into the world, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, what good is it? I mean, you already, when you go on the other side, you already know that stuff that you're trying to find out here. I mean, don't worry, I mean, here, we are here to do something, for everybody, in a cooperative manner as far as we can, and if we are unable to be cooperative, then that's a signal that we need to find out what's wrong with us, not with them.
Exactly.
This kind of thing, so those are the things that I learned early on, being an entrepreneur, in a way, taking responsibility for my life. Which is what then many of the new age was saying later on, but you have to find it out for yourself first, not because you read in a book, and then knowing, doing is the only way to know, and doing in the sense of experiencing, in the sense of living it, right? Most people that goes into the traditions, they read books, or they keep on reading the scriptures, or they try to have experiences like they were written in that book or in that way. I mean, we're all different. I don't care if my experience was like another one, though I can recognize, however, when in a description of somebody, the commonalities between my experience and somebody else that describes theirs. But I'm the only one that can do that, because I'm the only one that has an experience that can compare with what I read, and what I read is incomplete, where my experience is full, right? Is much richer than what I read.
Oh, it's just fantastic, because really, your genius is your willingness, your fearlessness, the lion's roar, to do broadsides against the prevailing scientific paradigm, the high priest, the cult of scientific materialism. And at the same time, like I just invited to, I think this is also very important, because I roll obviously mostly in that world, and I have drunk the Tibetan Buddhist Kool-Aid for a number of reasons, but mostly tax purposes. But I'm also very interested in truth. It doesn't matter where it comes from. And that's why I draw it from physics, science, neuroscience, whatever. I don't care. Whoever speaks the truth, I'm going to listen. And so this tendency for ossification, for reification, to take our strategies, our disciplines, our approaches, whether it's scientific or spiritual, thinking that somehow that's the only way. This is an ongoing practice of openness.
But it's the old idea, Andrew, that there is truth and false, that you can actually prove what is true and what is false, as if truth and falseness were static things. It is not. In fact, even logic is, in the theorem of Gödel, Gödel has shown that using logic and an axiomatic system, you can actually make statements that you can never prove whether they are right or wrong. So what does it mean? It means that they are both. It means that they are both, and you can choose one or the other, and then you go into a certain road or another. For example, the postulate or the parallels in Euclidean geometry, the fifth postulate, was considered the postulate. So according to that postulate, non-Euclidean geometry should not exist.
Right.
Okay. But then, somebody said, wait a second, this postulate can actually not be proven using the other four postulates, so it could even be wrong because
Right.
it's not proved, right? So what happened if it's wrong? So all of a sudden you had Riemann geometries,
Exactly.
Lobachevsky geometry,
Allows
you have
Einstein.
new geometries that are telling you that the world is much richer than it was before.
Yeah.
So there is, so is a choice, but then you have to choose. You say, if you're working with Lobachevsky geometry, you cannot claim that world, obeys Euclidean geometry.
Yeah.
You see, that's how different entities are actually exploring knowing, because there are things that are true and false
At the same time. Yeah.
simultaneously.
Yeah, dialetheism, and this is really, I love this so much because, again, as we go back and whether we know it or not, we live in Aristotle's world, we live in Euclid's world. These are paradigms that basically freeze frame us into this kind of myopia, these extremely limited worldviews that we take as axiomatic. And they go all the way down to the deconstruction of what you experience in your dissolution of the self sense. And so by being open, willing to be humble, willing to be challenged, which again, the scientist on a certain level, that's their blessing and their curse, their extraordinary capacity to be so articulate. But I always say that the near enemy of articulation is reification. And so the really beautiful thing about, again, what you're doing here is the gadfly, the challenge, getting in there like Socrates. I mean, he had to drink the hemlock, right? Causing enough stir, enough of a fuss that people can at least walk away and say, hey, wait a second, maybe I need to look at this again. And then they start to open the aperture of their awareness.
Yeah, but most important, that they need to look inside instead of looking at the next book that is going to tell you another story. And you want to go from story to story instead of ever looking where the actual truth is inside yourself.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. So as we start to close, and again, this is so great. Tell us a little bit what you're working on. You mentioned two books. I know one of them is called Irreducible. Just a little bit about what we have to look for.
Irreducible is already done. It's two new books, but I want, it's too early for me to tell about them.
Oh, okay.
So the Irreducible is basically a take on the last chapter of Silicon, where in broad terms, the theory that was written before we had this theory with Ariano, but the basic ideas are all there. So the theory of that with Ariano simply cements much more what at that point you could call speculation. Now is less of a speculation because it's rooted on some solid grounding, which is this theory with Ariano. So Irreducible was printed in September in Italian. I wrote the first part in English and the second part in Italian because Italian was richer for the second part than English. I'm sorry, I don't want to offend the English language, but also that was my first language, Italian, so I can I grog it more.
Sure.
And it's doing very well. I sold about 40,000 copies, which is amazing for a book of that complexity, especially in the Italian market. And this is it came out September 7th. So in little more than 6 months, I sold that many. It's still going strong. There will be an English version, and I cannot say when it will come out because it's in the hands of the publisher, so I don't know. And then I'm working on 2 more that will, that enrich and expand on what I've already done. Pretty much, as my theory causes many more questions than he answers, and so I can go on for the rest of my life, expanding on the things, on the connections of my theory with this new view of reality. But I actually want to, my sort of important things that I want to do is finding that crucial experiment that will actually prove that the theory with Ariano is solid, is actually valid. It may not be possible to disprove it, to falsify it, but you falsify the consequences of the existing theories, and so that's good enough. And many things in physics are never proven directly. For example, you cannot prove directly that quantum information, cannot be known, because you cannot know it. You cannot know the actual thing and compare it to what you don't know. So it's one of those things where there are things that you got to believe only because they make sense and they lead to something that makes sense and that can be proven.
Yeah, beautiful. Any question that I should have asked that I didn't? Any final words? We covered a lot of stuff. Anything that you may have wanted to say that I didn't allow the opportunity to express around?
No, there is so much, and no matter where you start, you end up away from the core. And yet you can come back and finding that you can go into another thread and you find that the core still holds. It makes sense. I mean, we don't. The world doesn't start without consciousness. It starts with something with conscious entities, because consciousness is a property of entities. It's not. Consciousness doesn't exist per se as ontology. Is the property of the ontology is in the entities, in these seities, in these monads, in these consciousness units that then combine, creates combination of themselves, which are also have the same properties of the original, and on it goes. So if you start that way, you absolutely have a completely different view of reality, and it would take many lifetimes to explore that.
Yeah. Well, Federico, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to my community. We'll ping this far and wide. I'll do whatever I can to let people know about your work, because it's really remarkable.
Yeah, some people can get a lot, reading Silicon, because that book actually goes through all my life, and people that are in this journey can actually read in between the lines. They can read in between the lines, which which other people don't, because they're only interested in this stuff, right? But in this book, I just from the beginning, I hint at what will come at the end.
Well, I, for one, am much richer because of being introduced to your work, Federico. I wish you all the best. And perhaps when Irreducible is translated into English and I get a chance to read it, we can have another round of version with it. It's been a total delight on my part. So big bow gratitude from over here, and look forward to the next time. Bye now.
Thank you, and thank you to your readers.